Hello, welcome. My name is Nathan Nelson. I'm the pastor of Mission and Outreach here at Bethany Community Church, where we are live streaming from today. And I am joined by some dear friends, Sparrow Carlson
Hello.
and Melissa Gossientz, who will introduce themselves more in just a moment. But I just wanted to quickly set up this conversation that we're inviting you to in this evening. So this is a conversation around a fire, if you will. It's not too warm, though it is close. And we are going to be talking as pastors. I'm a pastor. Sparrow here is a pastor. And this is the lens that we bring to the conversation around homelessness here in our city of Seattle. And the truth is that we have a whole lot of experience from other areas of our lives, be it from the nonprofit world or in Sparrow's case from Aurora Commons, a longtime partner of Bethany. And so we bring that as well. But tonight we really want to emphasize for us this conversation about God's heart when he looks at our city and considers the plight of folks living inside and living outside. And so as pastors, we will do our best to engage this conversation. And we have some questions that we've solicited from the community that we've received, and then more questions that we'll be anticipating receiving from all of you that are watching right now. And so without further ado, Melissa, I hand it off to you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Gossientz. I am not a pastor. I'm coming here, like all of you, as a congregant, as a Christian, just kind of seeking what God is calling us to in this area. And so I'm here to ask some questions, help bring up some different topics, and see where the conversation and your questions lead us. So my role here at Bethany, I'm a lay leader, and I help oversee our partnership with the Aurora Commons. So I look forward to hearing from your questions tonight. And I'll let Sparrow introduce herself.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Sparrow Etter Carlson, and I am a neighbor. I live right down the street on 89th Street, and I am one of the founders of Aurora Commons, and so grateful to be here with you all tonight. So thank you for inviting me and turning on the fire.
Right back at you, Sparrow. Grateful to be with you.
We're going to start there at Sparrow and ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your history with the Commons, and how God awakened this fire for the unhoused in you, and why this was sort of the calling that God was calling you to.
Yeah, I think I would love to start by telling you a few things that I am, and then a few things that I am not. So, like I mentioned, I am a neighbor. I have lived in Seattle off of Aurora within about a 3-block radius since 2004. I'm a homeowner. I'm a mom. I have 2 young kids that go to Bagley School right across from this campus here. I'm looking at it right now. I am a wife. I am a woman. I am a daughter. I am a sister. A couple things that I am not. I am not someone who has lived experience, so I've never found myself unhoused. I am not someone who has lived experience with prostitution, so I've never had to engage in sex work. I am not someone who believes at the end of the day that I am a voice for the voiceless, because I believe that the folks who sleep outside have a loud and beautiful, unique, glorious voice, but that they just don't have the privilege of stopping long enough to be here with us this evening. So another thing that I am is never comfortable with sharing their stories on their behalf. But I always try to do my best to midwife their stories with just an acknowledgement that they are my teachers, and they are my guides, and they are my friends, and I love them. And so as we engage this conversation, I just want to root us in that. And then I think I'd like to start by sharing a story about how I think I found myself living out my own calling. I think I've shared this story with you guys before, but after I graduated college, this was back in 2002, I took an internship in Chicago at a women's homeless shelter. And I was working with the youth, actually. Youth would come in from the local projects. This was at the time where they still had projects in Chicago. So I was predominantly working with the youth of the projects. So they would come in during the day when the women at the shelter had to leave during the day. And then they would leave, and then the women from the shelter would come in the evening time. I'll have to say I loved working in the shelter. I was young. I was eager. I wanted to serve God. I wanted to come alongside folks that were different from me and that were unhoused and othered in our society. When my internship was up, I really wanted to stay on and get to know the women of the shelter. I felt really drawn to them and realized that when I was there and the times that we had kind of encounters with one another, I had a really hard time connecting with them at the level that I desired to. So when my internship was up, I asked our director there if I could stay on. And really the only job that was available at the time, there was a case management position available, but because of my interactions, I decided I didn't want to do the case management job. I felt like it wasn't going to enable me to connect with the women on the level that I wanted to. So the only other job that was available was the janitor position. So I was like this young 21-year-old fresh out of college girl from Michigan, like definitely was like a mall goer in high school, like not someone that you necessarily would think of as a janitor. And I can tell you it was absolutely the thing that changed the trajectory of my life forever, was becoming the janitor. So what happened is I started to clean alongside these women every day. So there were about 40 women living in the shelter, and snaking the 9 toilets. The 9 toilets for 40 women is not enough. I can tell you that much. I will tell you that much. So a lot of snaking the toilets, a lot of just working alongside of them. Wow. And getting to know them. And it was over the months that was when they really started sharing their life with me and their stories with me. And there was one specific time, and if I close my eyes, I can still feel it in my body. It still brings me to tears. Where I was cleaning alongside them like we did every day. And when this was happening, a busload of individuals pulled up outside the shelter, and they all came in, and they were all in the kitchen making the food that they were going to serve to the women. Different groups would come in throughout the day and make breakfast and dinner because they were gone during the day. And I was cleaning alongside this one woman, or along multiple women, and they just looked at me and essentially were like, do you have any idea what it feels like to see people coming in day after day and making and serving us food? And essentially never being what they kind of unpacked for me was to tell me that even though they're grateful, that doesn't feel good. For them to constantly have the narrative of people coming in from out of their community to serve them, that they've never been told that they have something to offer in this world and for this world, and what that does to them. That everything that they go to, so they have to leave the shelter during the day, they go to the library, then they're kicked out of the library, or they go to a park, then they're kicked out of the park, and then they come back to the shelter and they're served food. Everything is either move on or is transactional in their life. And that moment, it had to have been just the Spirit washing over me, like a good teacher, showing me that even in our greatest attempts as a church and as Christians, as a Christian ministry, there are ways that we are still perpetuating a narrative of objectifying and of service in a way that's just not humanizing. And so for me, that moment, like I said, changed me forever, where everything that I've tried to at least put my time and efforts towards has been to try to essentially deconstruct that model, that transactional model of care, and create models that are greeting the inherent dignity of the person and are based around the fact that every single person on this good earth has something to offer in this world and for this world. And so by cultivating models of belonging and community. And so that's what I've tried to put my time and efforts towards. And all along with them at the center, those women, my good teachers at the center of all that I do.
That's awesome. Nathan, can you kind of build on that about what the Commons is to Bethany, and sort of exactly what Sparrow was just talking about, how the Commons embodies that and why Bethany has been drawn to that, and why with this common compassion now, that this is the time for us to really step into that and open our hearts to that.
That is a great question. And oh my gosh, Sparrow, I'm like always inspired when I'm around you, but you tell stories in a way that like you don't just hear words, like you experience the essence of what's being said. It's so amazing. There's something I want to say about that a little bit later. Don't let me forget. Okay. But that's a great question. So how did Bethany land in this place at this time? You know, we as a church, as you well know, Sparrow and Melissa, you're both very involved in all that we do with Aurora Commons. But I think it starts before an organization, it starts before, you know, an institution, and it starts at the place that God has established for us, around us, in the neighborhood. Yeah. And here at Bethany Green Lake, we find ourselves literally right in the middle of two radically different worlds. We have, on the one hand, one of the most wealthy neighborhoods in all of Seattle. And on the other hand, we have the Aurora Corridor, home to, you know, some of the most sexual exploitation of women and other kinds of extreme poverty, houselessness, right here in our midst. Yeah. And the reality is, when I look around in this, what is currently an empty sanctuary, many of the people that fill these seats reflect one significantly more than the other. Yeah. Yeah. And so we, as a church, many years ago, right, decades ago, said, what does it look like to be a place that can be a place of convergence, where these two very different places can find the reality of Christ's presence together? And a lot of our ministries over the years, to be frank, have been more transactional. Yeah. They have largely been serving a meal to people, allowing people to stay in our women's shelter for a time. And those things are phenomenal. And the way that we've been able to adapt to them and grow them over the course of time have become less transactional and more relational. Yeah. And yet there's still this acknowledgement that as a church, you know, we're not currently at a place where on a Sunday morning necessarily you're going to see a massive influx of folks living outside on Aurora. Sure. They won't feel comfortable here. Sure, and so what would it look like to create a place to support the ongoing creation of a place that could be this point of convergence? And so I think Aurora Commons, the living room on Aurora, is that place. Yeah. And my passion has been, and Melissa, you know this, I'm gonna tee you up to answer this at some point, if not now, but you know, seeing people from the congregation go, I too wanna see this dividing wall come down and find my place in the story. Yeah. And I think that it's been our challenge to find ways that these two groups, in many ways, can realize that they're one group. And so that's the work. And I think that that's the work we've been doing a lot more together. Yeah. Our Common Compassion Initiative is just one of many expressions of that. And so that's a little bit about how we've arrived here at this place at this time. One other thing that I will just quickly say is Sparrow represents Aurora Commons. She also represents Awake Church, which is located literally at the Commons. Yep. And your husband is a longtime pastor at Awake Church. He is, yeah. And it's been our desire at Bethany to link arms with Awake and other churches on the corridor to be able to engage this together. And so we call ourselves the North Aurora Church Empowerment Zone. And the goal of our little empowerment zone is to see this exact thing happen more and more. And so Melissa, you've been a huge part of that. But the hope is to see more opportunities as local churches to provide environments in which we can experience life together, housed and unhoused. Yep.
Great.
Absolutely.
I'm going to jump kind of right all around in our questions. We got lots of really great questions from people ahead of this. And I hope if you have questions that are coming up through this conversation, type them into the chat wherever you are, and we'll hopefully get to some. We've got a lot already. But kind of building on this conversation that we're having right now, I know one of the things that I struggle with is this feeling like, okay, God, you've opened this up in my heart, but what am I supposed to do? How do I fix this? How do I solve this problem? And so can we talk a little bit about exactly what the Commons does do, and how we as Christians in our heart reconcile this difficulty between wanting to fix everything, but realizing that that's not necessarily our calling, that our calling is to embody Christ. And a lot of times that is just giving a cup of coffee and a conversation or a smile. Yeah.
I think it's only right we start with you, Sparrow.
I know. I'm just like, I know.
There's not a lot to address there.
I'm catching up. Well,
simple.
so I think I'm gonna refer to my notes. So,
Please.
yeah. So like, how are you reconciling your own experiences, your own biases, and your own desire to live out your calling, God's calling?
Yes.
Correct.
Well, or I was going back to just sort of what exactly the Commons does, this idea of the living room,
Yeah.
and what its
Yeah.
calling was, the Commons. I think a lot of the
Yeah.
questions were around how are we working through this campaign to fix homelessness?
Yeah.
And I wanted to sort of take a step back
Yeah.
and talk just more about that it's not always about fixing something,
Yeah.
that the heart is that's your experience in the beginning,
Yeah.
that most people just want to be seen, heard, recognized,
Yeah.
respected,
Yeah.
and not necessarily,
Yeah.
well,
Yep.
not fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, I think it's just really important for all of us, even as we engage this conversation, to remember that these are our kin. I mean, they are desiring of the same things that we are desiring of this world. And so in the same ways that we can feel pain or exiled or joy or delight, they also feel these things. And so, I think about even just the silliest of things that I can get overwhelmed in, like that doctor's appointment that I need to make that I keep not making. And then I have so much shame about the fact that I haven't made that doctor's appointment. And then, but I have like a husband and consistency and four walls that I live in, and people that are, I mean, this is such a silly example, but we all do these things like that are reminding me to take care of myself and make that call. Or folks that are living on Aurora Avenue, that are living in our communities, that are sleeping outside, they literally are not welcomed anywhere in our society. They are told and treated as though they don't matter. And that's just the reality. I think we have this misconception that there is a menu of services available to these precious folks. But the fact is that there is not. And the services that have been created for them aren't accessible or kind to them. So imagine being someone who has to navigate the world by always like checking a box or signing in to receive that which we all deserve as precious human beings in this life. Or having to say, yes, I was sexually assaulted in order to get services. Or no, I was not sexually assaulted. Or yes, in order for me to get what I rightly deserve as a precious human being, I have to tell you that I'm not dependent on drugs in order to get what I rightly deserve as a human being. And so, when we created the Commons many years ago, and it was not just myself, it was a community of folks who were sharing life with our friends that sleep outside, realizing that they had no place to go where they were told and treated as though they matter, where they were part of a community, and just like us, a place to kind of work out, make meaning together. Like as Christians, we're meaning makers. That's one thing I know.
Amen.
Like we're meaning makers. And so the fact is that we're all trying to orient our lives in ways to make meaning out of our own pain, out of our own shame, out of our own longings and desires. There's no places like that for these precious humans. There just isn't. And so we realized that when we were hanging out with our friends on the street, and that's why we created the Commons. And so the only thing that we did when we started the Commons was to, of course, take some of the things I had learned from my wise teachers at the shelter and create a neighborhood living room based around a kitchen where we weren't cooking and serving food, but the refrigerator was stocked with food. And folks that don't have kitchens can come in and they can open it up, the refrigerator. They can choose what they want to make, and they get to make it themselves. And they get to choose whether or not they want to make it for other people. And, so I think that was the idea when we first started. But I can honestly tell you, we had a hunch that would be really impactful. It's sad that it would be really impactful, but it has blown our minds. If there's one thing that people will tell you about the Commons and what makes it special, is that they get to come in and open the refrigerator and pick out what they want and make it, and also get to serve others. So we started with that, Melissa, and then from that, as we continued to share life with one another and midwife a safe space of hospitality, it was then that we started to realize and grieve and shake our fists in the air because we were so tired of losing our friends to preventable things. And so we realized, people can't come to heal, can't come to know their belovedness in the eyes of God if they're dead. So we started to have to respond, figure out ways to create, out of this ecosystem of belonging, create accessible, kind models of care that keeps our friends alive. So it's from that and everything that we've learned that we've created what's called our She Clinic, our Safe, Healthy, Empowered Clinic, because we were tired of losing our friends for treatable things, tired of taking our friends to the emergency room and seeing them treated like worse than a dog, tired of the inaccessibility of all the social services that are housed downtown, where our friends, they don't have the time, they don't have IDs, they don't have phones. All these things are inaccessible to them. So we decided to try to bring those things to them in a place where they feel known, seen, and valued. And I tell you what, it's everything. So we've been able to create these models of care, bringing in a partnership with Harborview Hospital, creating this She Clinic, which we care. It's a comprehensive medical clinic for women that have to engage in street-based survival prostitution, not to make money, but to take a shower, to eat food, So that's what we do at the Commons, is use that relational clout to bridge them to the things and the services that they rightly deserve as human beings just like us.
What I love about that is we talk a lot in our ministries with refugees, with other organizations, that we really believe if you just show love and openness and hearedness to people, we can just let Jesus do the rest and let God work on everything else. And I think that's really hard. And maybe Nathan, you can unpack that a little bit. It's really hard for us sometimes, especially whenever we talk about like our privilege and this disparity between where we are, that a lot of people in our congregation, myself included, are like doers. We're fixers. We're, okay, God, you opened me up to the compassion. Now I feel like I need to do something and save someone.
Yeah.
But a lot of times what we're called to is just to be the heart of God, to be the heart of Jesus. Nathan, can you kind of build on what we're trying to do here at Bethany?
Yeah, absolutely. And we started the conversation tonight saying we're approaching this as pastors. And I just want to take a moment as your pastor, as a pastor, and say, let's not gloss over this, right? Let's not gloss over the profound impact of compassion.
Yeah.
Our initiative here that we've been running for the last 50 days, A Common Compassion, is about awakening a movement of compassion in our city for those that live outside. Friends, we are too quick to solutions, period.
Yeah.
We are far too quick to think that somehow the only thing worth doing is fixing problems.
Yeah.
And if I've learned anything from Sparrow, it's that folks on the streets are not problems to be solved.
That's
Come
right.
on.
That's right. They're not pariahs. They're people. They're not problems to be solved. We have to approach it less as a problem-oriented thing and more of a wholeness enhancing narrative. That's what Jesus did.
And this is what I hope that we're gathering from the very outset here. And this is so key. It's so foundational. We rush beyond this and we can't do it. What does it mean for you? What does it mean for me to let this compassion well up in such a way that it's the foundation for anything and everything that I do in response?
Yeah.
And we call it, there's all kinds of literature out there, whether it's short-term mission trips abroad or something happening locally, the conversation around debunking, if you will, the God complex that we all carry is incredibly important.
Yeah.
The authors of the book When Helping Hurts do such a good job of describing this dynamic that really is our sin nature taking over, that sort of commodifies people
That's right.
as a thing that serves us or that we serve.
Yeah.
And this idea that somehow we are going to, it's our job to fix whatever the thing is we perceive is that needs fixing. And, you know, as Christians, we believe in a God who, part of our profound self-understanding that comes as Christians is we need God, right? We have to acknowledge our finitude. And so I think that same level of humility that leads us to a place of repentance in our lives and our personal faith in the Lord is the same level of humility that we need when we approach our brothers and sisters, whether they're housed or unhoused.
Absolutely.
And to recognize that my job isn't, never was, never will be to save this person, to fix whatever problem is that's catching my attention within them. But if I can see them as a whole person, if I can see myself as related to that person in the family of God, but that relationship has boundaries around it. That relationship can be significant, but it doesn't have to be everything to that person. It doesn't have to be everything to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good word.
And I think that so often our God complex prevents us from ever engaging in a relationship with someone that, God forbid, might actually transform us as well as transform them, that we never get off the bench.
Yeah.
It's that God complex in us, I think, that leads us to turn away
Yeah.
when we walk past someone at the corner or at the supermarket or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's, we feel like if we can't fix it, which we can't, and we were never supposed to begin with, then why engage at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think for me, what's so important is to recognize that maybe the problem we should all be thinking about is the compassion that's held deep within us, the Holy Spirit in us. It needs to be unearthed and released from us. If we can address that problem in ourselves, then maybe we have the hope of seeing some restoration happen for people who are in all kinds of crazy, difficult, broken situations. Did I answer your question at all?
Well, tell us how to do it, guys.
Sure, no problem.
Oh no, this is the how-to part.
Because
My
we're
here's the
pastors.
theoretical
No,
sleeve.
here's
We
the
don't know
deal.
how.
I think it's
That's not true. We
you
do.
know, tell me an amount to write on a check, or tell me a place I can show up to make some burritos, which is a great thing. And I can do that. Talk to me about how I unpack the Holy Spirit in my heart, because that's a lot of work.
Yeah. 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 I actually spent some time writing, I think, a response to that. And I think I'll read it just because it'll help.
I would love that.
It'll help to ground me. But I think, you know,
Buckle up, people. When-
yeah.
when-
Okay, no, that's embarrassing.
I don't want to say you up, but
Oh,
I'm
my
just
goodness.
saying, like,
No.
I feel like I'm at the feet of
Oh.
someone who looks a lot like Jesus when I'm
Okay.
talking to you. So.
That is sweet and not true, but thank you. Yeah, I think, I think that is such a good question. But I think what is extremely important to each of us as we ask that question, what we feel called to, what do we do, is that we acknowledge that living out the answer to that question is absolutely informed by our own stories of pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what I brought up before, of grief, of abuse, of addiction, of belonging, of feeling exiled. And our own stories are always bound up and reflected in the face of the other, but especially in the face of the poor. And if we're looking to God and the life of Christ to inform our own particular way of living this out, then God's call honestly could not be more clear. There is no such thing in the kingdom of God as the deserving or the undeserving poor.
Mm-hmm.
Period. In fact, over and over again in Scripture, God reveals God's preferential option for the poor. This principle is rooted in both the Old and New Testaments and claims that a preferential concern for the physical and spiritual welfare of the poor is an essential element of the gospel. But I think what we've seen over and over again is that in the long history of the church, that speaking to our context here now in the global north, is that we've drifted from a way of the original group of Jesus followers who essentially in all things, thought, parable, praxis, subverted the religious and empirical rule that was putting boundaries around who's invited and who's not, who's dirty, who's not, so on and so forth. In essence, I see our modern day church and so many of us Christians asking the question of what our calling is in regards to our unhoused neighbors through the very framework, a quantifiable and quantifiable one, that Jesus was so adamantly against.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think our greatest task now, Melissa, before we can even ask the question of what do we do, is to unlearn the antithesis of the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we're asking questions, in all things, I mean, even when we're praying for that compassion, we're going to see things in the way that our society has taught us to see things. Which again, we have to break down our whole way of thinking. My biggest job at the Commons is to unlearn every single day.
Mm-hmm.
To unlearn and relearn. Because the things that I've been taught, are they safe? Are they not? Are they dirty? Am I going to get this disease? They would keep me paralyzed from engaging this population. Absolutely keep me paralyzed. I have to pray to unlearn all these things that I've inherited in my cultural narrative and just ask to be foolish and unlearn all this stuff. And then I can actually ask God, what do I do? But I can ask God, what do I do when I'm gazing at the person in front of me who is a precious human being, unique in particular. You know, when we're with ourselves, when we're sitting with our families, the people we love, we afford them nuances in their story. It's time that we do that as a church for folks on the margins.
Come on.
We don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet this isn't just like, go on in and love others. Loving others is the hardest work we're called to. You know, we've got this, both theoretically and literally, Jesus turned tables and then gave us the blueprint to build a table for all.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get to work doing that. But we can't get to work doing that until we're nestled at the heart of God, asking God to help us unlearn and relearn our kindred humanity. Sorry, I got going a little bit there, but
Already said that we're pastors. If anyone is disturbed by us getting on a preaching rant, then sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Can't help it.
Well, just quickly in response to that
I
question.
lost my earring, by the way, during that.
Oh my gosh, look at you.
You know that saying when people are like, hold my earring? Like, kind of just happened.
Yeah, I use the saying all the time, hold my earring. Yeah, it's just how. Practically speaking, and I think you alluded to this, but I just want to highlight it for us again. I think anything that we are to do in response ought to be born out of relationship.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that means being foolish enough to engage in that relationship with all of our biases, with all of our preconceived notions. And maybe you leave a conversation like the one we're having tonight and you go, okay, maybe I do have biases, and be ready to run into those.
Absolutely.
But don't stop yourself from engaging. Allow that relationship to teach you,
Absolutely.
to be your teacher, as you said, Sparrow. And so I think when we ask, how can compassion grow in me? It doesn't happen from, you and your phone or you and your Bible off somewhere in a corner, whatever. Revelation comes in relationship. And we need to engage. And when we engage, I think that's when we're going to start to see, one, what is the real need happening here? In all of the beautiful particularity, as you've said, in a given person, in a given community. And then we can ask God that question of, how do I respond?
I want to kind of follow up on some of what you said. We talked about before, and I think Nathan knows the story, my experience of how I came to the Commons, and that it was really born out of a frustration that I had with needles in the parks of my neighborhood, with things that I saw that I didn't want to see in my neighborhood. And so then this opening came to step into this leadership role at Bethany. And I just felt like God was saying, your heart is hardened right now. You need to step into this. And then on my first week at the Commons, there were someone there doing a study about needles. And I learned right away, why needles end up in my park, and sort of all of the implications that go along with that. And it was, like you said, an unlearning of those prejudices and biases. And then through relationships or people that I've met in the Commons, that I've spent months talking to, and then finding out that their profession is prostitution, and having to unpack that in myself. This question of, well, one, why am I even questioning how I feel about that? But just unpacking that. And so I think, a lot of the questions that we received from people were with these just very ingrown biases that we have, whether it comes to unhoused neighbors being lazy or not wanting to get out of their situation, or that everyone is addicted to drugs or mental illness, or that all women are prostitutes. Could you kind of speak a little bit to your experience with people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
How we address some of those in ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be really honest with the fact that, my husband and I'll speak for myself, is, I've spent my days with intention towards my unhoused neighbors in some capacity in different contexts for almost 20 years. And as someone who's a homeowner and who has young children, it's really hard. As someone who depends on my home value, like, it was hard for us to buy a home. It depends on my home value. Like, I'd like it to not go down. I don't like having the, I totally feel, like, I just want to be really honest with you guys. I'm with you. Like, I feel these things. I feel the friction in my body in these questions. But what I can tell you is this. I have never, in my almost 20 years of being in relationship with folks that are polysubstance users, that sleep outside, that are othered in our society, that have to engage in sex work, I've never met one person who enjoys being enslaved to a drug. I have never met one woman in the hundreds upon hundreds of women that I have a relationship with who have told me that they enjoy having to engage in street-based prostitution to survive. I have never, in almost 20 years, met a man who has not had multiple head injuries that mostly started when they were a child from the abuse of their parent that continue now. The list goes on and on. These precious people do not want to be enslaved. They do not want to live in the underbelly of our society.
Right.
They don't. They do not want to be without their children. They are not using drugs to get high.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many misconceptions, and it's like, I really, I think when it comes down to having a job, getting help, man, alive, they are just like us. They want to make meaning. I can't tell you, I can't even keep up with the number of people that want to help us take out the trash at the Commons. They want to have a job, want to have a task. The vast majority of these individuals do not have an ID. They don't have a birth certificate. Try getting a birth certificate for someone who's been unhoused for years. They don't have phones. They do not have phones. You can't get a job if you don't have a phone, if you don't have a place to live, if you don't have a birth certificate. You also can't get a job, again, if you're told and treated your whole entire life that you're a problem to be solved, not a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the work of the church is to be the one that goes in and speaks to, again, like I mentioned before, not the problem solving, but the wholeness encouraging, or the wholeness, I forget the word I used. I think it was like pretty, I just can't remember what it was. Now
Profound.
it's going to bother me now. I can't remember. But that, there is nothing wrong with transactional models of care. I need people to stay alive. So don't hear me say that there's anything wrong. What I want to say is that as the church, we are the people with the Holy Spirit imagination that will do the good, hard work of being in relationships with people, which is the good, hard work, because that's not quantifiable or
Right.
qualifiable.
I love that. Yeah.
It's cultivating places of belong, not even you're right. They're not going to feel comfortable coming here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But how will we go about our days? Being people committed to unlearning and relearning with a kingdom of God, upside down ethic, so that folks know that they are beloved, so that they can be bridged to the things that will help them heal and be whole and know their belovedness in God. And that is what I don't see us doing enough.
Right.
And that breaks my heart. Because as someone who has tried to commit their life to doing this for the last 20 years, it is the actual literal thing that makes a difference.
How are we going to do it, Nathan?
Well, this is a great question, and I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to.
Thank you.
Yes. Like I said, it's like sitting at the feet of a.
Okay.
Yeah. But seriously, and at risk of, I don't want to embarrass you, but I do want to use you as an example. This is what I said at the beginning that I wanted to come back to. I have the privilege in my role here at the church to come and be at the Commons with a fair degree of regularity. And I absolutely love every opportunity I get to come and meet with people from your staff, because it means that I'm going to come around this table that you have created with all kinds of folks. And it's like, you want to have a meeting with anyone at the Commons, you're invited to the table.
Absolutely.
With the Commons.
Yep.
Which is everybody. And it's awesome. I love it. One of the things I will tell you that has impacted me probably as much as any of the beautiful things that you say, like we're hearing from you, is the way that you look at people and you embrace people. Like, I think of my own life, Sparrow. I want people to look at me and embrace me like you do to people. But Sparrow is doing this with people who don't get a look and don't get an embrace, maybe for years.
Yeah. Yes, that is safe to say.
And that is the work of the Christian
Yeah,
in response to the unhoused.
100%.
With that little anecdote in mind, the spirit of trust, compassion, that is the foundation for all that the Commons does, is the secret sauce. And I appreciate that you said it's the uniquely Christian sauce, if you will.
Yes,
That
I believe that.
we as Christians, as the church, as extensions of the church, parachurch organizations like the Commons, are able to do.
Yeah.
And are called to do.
Absolutely.
And speaking to outcomes, I think a lot of the questions that we received as we prepared for this, and that I've been getting, I get these as someone leading the Common Compassion Initiative here at Bethany. It's like, what does the Commons do? So it's this place of compassion, wonderful. But I think really the question behind the question is, what's the impact of that compassion? What's the impact of that trust? And for me, it just comes rushing in, all these amazing stories. But I so appreciate that we've spent over the first half an hour of our conversation not getting to some of those things, because I think we can run the risk of missing the point, which is that people finding secure housing, people experiencing restoration of mind, heart, body, soul, spirit, all the things, comes on the far side of this idea of compassion that we've been talking about.
Yep.
And so does the Commons have impact in these other areas, of metrics that
Yes, and
our city
majorly.
uses?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Big time.
And I think that it needs to be said, whether you want to toot your own horn or not, but Aurora Commons, and I'm proud as a church to be a part of the Commons for so many reasons, but one of them is seeing from the time it was this seed of an idea, of a passion, to what it is now. Aurora Commons is one of the leading organizations working with folks experiencing homelessness in the city of Seattle, period.
Yeah.
In the Puget Sound region, period. And this is evidenced by outside organizations tasked with things like housing, like health and wellness of folks on the streets, like substance abuse prevention and restoration. They're coming to the Commons as that place where they can share what they have to offer, because the Commons has the trust built.
Yep.
And so, the reason they're coming to the Commons isn't just because where are we going to find a bunch of people living outside? No, they could go to the encampments if they wanted. They could go anywhere if they wanted. But people come to the Commons because it's a place where there's trust and where people might actually access those next steps and those opportunities because the trust has been built.
Yep.
And so I just can I ask my own question?
Yes, you may.
Great.
Take it away.
Sparrow, could you tell a story or two or whatever of how have you seen the impact of compassion, as you've described it, the trust you build with the community outside, in a way that has really gone leaps and bounds in terms of, the impact on a person's life?
Oh, man. I just started to close my eyes for a second and think of what stories come up. There's so many. Oh, man.
I also know one specific
No,
story.
I know the
tell.
one you want me to tell, and I'm trying to think of. No, I think I will tell a portion of the story. Well, we've had this young man coming to the Commons for a number of months. We actually didn't meet him until after the pandemic started, and he's a young Black man living outside, definitely polysubstance user, untreated mental illness, which a lot of people use drugs to treat their mental illness, just as a side note. But probably 23 years old, and he would often come to the door pretty disordered, but always kind. Always would say hello, and we would always greet him by name. And but didn't say a lot. But yeah, he kept coming back regularly every day. And there would be a number of times throughout the weeks that I would see someone would come up to the door and say, "Hey, Sparrow, like he's out in the street again." Or, "Hey," to one of our other employees, "he's out in the street again." And one of us would have to go. It kind of became common practice to like kind of go out. He's in the middle of Aurora, kind of walking through traffic, again, disordered. Would have to say, "Tamu, come back, like come on back." And he'd kind of like click in for a second when he heard his name and come back. And there was one day where he came to the Commons and he could not open his eyes. He could not open his eyes, and he was like shaking, and you could tell he was really scared. And he said that he thought that he was going to throw up. So we rushed him to the bathroom and, closed the door, gave him some space, but then he was unresponsive. So I kept knocking on the door. And actually I was in the front and one of my employees came and got me. I went back and opened the door and he was on the ground, kind of convulsing. We weren't sure if he was overdosing. We weren't sure what was happening. But as I checked in with him and did the things that we do, I realized he wasn't overdosing, but there was clearly something going on. His eyes were watering. He couldn't open his eyes. He was rocking back and forth. And I just sat on the ground with him and kind of put my arms around him and just said, You're okay. It's going to be okay. And he said, "I can't open my eyes. I can't open my eyes." Told me, but it's really hard to understand him. So, I mean, so much of what we do is the work of an artist. Like we have to take like
Right.
things that people are saying and just try to make sense of them. And what I came to realize was that, at least what I presumed, is that he had been assaulted the night before. So I think he was highly traumatized. And this is a very young man.
Yeah.
And he had been maced.
Oh my goodness.
And so I got milk, because that's what you should do if someone's maced, just in case any of you ever need to know this. You pour milk on someone's eyes. So it was just crazy because I was pouring milk on his eyes and holding him, telling him he was going to be okay. And it happened to be the day of our clinic. So one of our doctors had heard this was happening, came back and said, asked him, "Do you think there's any way, like, because you're throwing up because of how you're feeling?" Asked him about his drug use, but then said, "Do you think there's any way that you've been exposed to COVID?" And he just kind of like was shaking, milk coming down his face, and he opened his eyes and he looked at me and he goes, "What's COVID?" And this was like in the middle of like the highest death rate during this time. That is how isolated some of these people are. He did not even know. And he's not alone in that. A lot of our folks didn't even know what COVID was. But I'm just setting up to tell you the next story about him. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of who he is and how precious he is and how young he is and how traumatized he is. It wasn't long after the George Floyd incident that Tamu was at our door again. I was just going about my business, and all of a sudden, all these cop cars pull up. Come to find out, he's on Aurora again, but he has a knife.
Oh goodness.
And I know that if I just say, "Tamu, come back in," this is what we do, right? He'll come back in. But all these cop cars are there now, lined up. I know most of these officers, right? Because of my work, I know them all too well. And we have a good relationship. But I said, "Let me go out and see if I can get him to come back in." I did that. It didn't work. When there's a ton of cop cars, those things often don't work.
Right.
So what we have now is a young Black man with a knife walking up and down Aurora. Again, young man who's highly traumatized, highly disordered, untreated mental illness. So I say to the cops, "Can I," he's walking north on Aurora now, up about a half a block from the Commons. The cops say, "We have to follow him." Multiple people have called. Obviously, people are going to keep calling if there's a young Black man walking up Aurora with a knife. We have to respond. I said, can I please go walk up there and try to get him and bring him back? No, I'm sorry, we can't let you do that. Now that it's been called, we have to protect you as well. So I finally convinced the cops to allow me to get in the car with them and follow him. So we did that, me and a cop car with 3 other cop cars behind us, following him up the road. He walked about 3 blocks up. And when we got to him, I asked the police officer if I could get out of the car and go to him, ask him to put the knife down. He said, no, I can't. You can't get out of the car. You have to use the
The
megaphone.
bullhorn. Yeah.
And so I got on the megaphone and I looked out the window and I said, Tama, Tama. And he looked at me. I said, sweetie, buddy, it was a beautiful day. I said, it is such a beautiful day. I want you to be able to go for a walk. But my love, you've got to put that knife away. You got to put that knife away. Can you put that knife away for me, please? Then you can go walk and enjoy the sun. He just kind of turned around, held the knife up, looked at us, and just put it away. I just these things happen all the time in our day-to-day life with these people, but I have to step back and I have to maybe give it a day or two. And then I realize that could have gone so differently. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
And as Christians, again, hearkening back to what I feel like is our unique calling, we're to be the people that speak on a megaphone in a way that the systems and the structures won't, so that people know their true name.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be the absurd ones. So thank you for letting me share that story. I feel like that didn't necessarily answer your question, but he's alive.
No, I think that was everything. You brought us home. We only have 3
Yes.
minutes.
Oh, yes.
And I think that just illustrates that is exactly what we're talking about. That, what I think we're all want to strive for right now is that if we just put ourselves in that role of being the megaphone of Christ, it's going to all get taken care of. And we just need to be open and compassionate to seeing and hearing.
Yeah, and folks, I think it can be really hard to know what to do. And you know what? There are many things that need to be done. But until we break down the boundaried ideologies that we've been given, we will only do harm. And so I beg you and I ask you, as followers of Christ, as my sisters and brothers of Christ, that when you're hearing people quantify, qualify, objectify folks that are sleeping outside, please call us back to our kindred humanity. That is the good hard work. It really is. There's so many things, that I have learned from my good teachers because I've spent my days with them. I know it's really hard to know the stories behind the stories, to know how to ask the questions behind the questions. But please do. With folks like me, with other folks that can help you understand their stories better. And please know that I asked one of our girls when I told her I was doing this, I said, what's one thing you'd want to say to people? And I really did ask that. And I wrote down what she said. And she said, let me just tell you, I have 1 minute. She said, I said, what would you say to neighbors who want to what's the best way for neighbors to get involved? Where would you tell them to start? And this is a woman who is beloved and is a polysubstance user, sleeps outside, and engages in prostitution. Word for word, she said, please stop judging me, please. It hurts. And if I say hi, please say it back. Or if I ask you what time it is, please tell me. I feel like you just ignore me.
This is the work.
Yep.
The good hard work.
Sparrow, thank you
Thank
so
Yes.
much for
Yes.
We love you guys.
joining
I love
this
you guys.
conversation. We love you guys.
Yes.
Melissa,
and we want to
thank you.
continue this conversation
do.
in the future
Yeah,
at Bethany.
thank you, Melissa.
Yes.
We will continue the conversation. And I just want to, as we close, give just a few tangible ways that you can continue in this journey of awakening the compassion of the Spirit within you and within our community. One, if you haven't taken advantage of the Common Compassion Initiative's devotional booklet, you can find that on our website. Sparrow and her husband, as well as myself and other pastors here at Bethany, have all contributed to that. It's accessible through the link that's being posted in the chat now. Also, we are always looking for more people to join the effort, where we have taken on the role of common staff in preparing meals that go to the commons during COVID and restrictions when the community kitchen can't be open like was described. And so please find on our website the opportunity to sign up there. You're gonna rub shoulders with people who can awaken compassion in you as they share their stories.
Yes.
And then finally, if you would, continue to ask your questions. Ask your questions formally to me, to us, over email, as well as of other people in our community here at the church. And may we hold each other accountable to embodying a spirit of compassion as we seek to address issues within all of our society. This is the work.
The good hard work. May it be so.
Thank you so much.